Hello there, aquatic adventurers. Welcome back to Music Land Stories, the origin point for all music and adventure stories in the known universe, and some of the unknown ones. And we're here at the Music Land Concert Hall. I'm your trusted narrator, the Captain, and it's time to dive into another new wave. My crew and I had just left the shores of High Brazil, a mystical island that only appears every 100 years or so, and we're ready to continue on our journey to find the last Leviathan. We perhaps spent a little too much time in that magical place, but the kids all needed a break. And, well, most people don't get to visit High Brazil more than once in their lives anyway. Margie, our resident drummer and the eldest of the crew, she had heard the song of the last Leviathan after a particularly harrowing battle with the sea snail. So I fired up my trusty portal to bring us back to the scene of the crime and help us on our quest. The fabled fish wasn't there anymore, of course, but we did hear something else singing from the ocean floor. We steered the ship down until we were close enough to see through the darkness the haggard hull of a seafaring vessel. A sunken ship. Sure, we had a majestic sea beast to catch, but who was I to keep the kids on my crew from this once-in-a-lifetime experience? So, of course, we anchored our submarine, suited up in our scuba gear, and headed off to explore the wreckage. I wanted to figure out what that haunting song was, the faintest whispers of a melody carried on the waves. The others mostly just wanted a cool story to tell. Margie and Mingus and Ezra and Kaylee were all eager to see the shipwreck. But Omar was sort of straggling behind. He was the youngest of our crew, at a healthy 7.5 years of age. But he'd also been dealing with a lot of big emotions ever since his beloved trumpet got bent out of shape during a bout of seafaring turbulence. Okay, fine. I made some poor steering choices which caused the trumpet to fall from a shelf and warp on the floor. But it should have been wearing a seatbelt. Even horns should practice proper transportation safety. So Omar just sort of sat back and watched while the others weaved their ways through the wreckage. They shined their deep-sea flashlights over warped wood and copper cracks, hoping one of them might find some sort of sunken treasure. Or at least a hermit crab wearing pottery as a shell or something silly like that. But somehow Omar ended up being the first one to find anything of value. He had wandered off from the rest of the group, following a faint melody from the hull before he finally found it waiting in the bilge, a gleaming golden conch shell. The trumpet of the sea. If Omar couldn't toot his own horn, maybe he could find a new fundamental frequency in that conical bore. It seemed like a good idea at the time anyway. What could go wrong? Omar wondered as he swam through the ship to find his new song. The answer, as it turned out, was a ghost. Or at least a ghost crab. Then another, and another, and another, each with one pale claw that was larger than the other. A legion of little white crustaceans menacingly clicking and crowing their carapaces as if to say, I dare you, bring it on. Oh, sorry, carapaces? Those are the bony shells on the back of crabs. They can use them to menacing effect when needed. But 7-year-olds can be stubborn or brave, depending on your point of view. Sometimes even both. And Omar wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. He swam down and settled on the ship's sandy floor. The weight of his movement dislodged something in the waterlogged wood. A hushed song rustled from out of the dust, then dissipated just as quickly. but not before it spooked the group of crabs enough to make them skitter and shuffle. That's right, Omar remembered then. Crabs walk sideways. All he had to do was find the pocket in the rhythm of their clickety-clanking claws and get past one row of crabs at a time, like pawns on a chessboard. Once he overtook one column, they couldn't step backwards to catch him, which would free him up to maneuver through the next rank of rhythmic reptantia. That's the scientific suborder for walking crustaceans, by the way. It literally means those who creep, which in this case means like crawling. But also, ghost crabs guarding treasure on a sunken ship is creepy in other ways too. Omar wasn't thinking about that though. He was busy getting ready for his first big move. He spent a lot of time on land playing games like Frogger and Tag. Certainly more time than he spent practicing his trumpet. But that's pretty normal behavior for a kid. And now it was about to pay off. Like he'd been training for this moment. Omar started to the right. The first line of crabs began to shuffle in response. So he faked them out and pushed off to the left, kicking up sand as he swam toward the swarm. Then bounced back to the right one more time. The crabs were so confounded by Omar's sudden movement that they started crashing into one another, causing quite a clickety-clackety cacophony. He used the calamity as a cover to cross through the next line, too. Omar was so close to the conch that he could almost taste it. Almost. But he could definitely hear it. Another strange melody came whirling from the valves. Omar thought he was imagining it, but it seemed like the crabs heard it too. You might say the melody was making them crabby. Omar decided to use that distraction to his advantage. He took a stutter step to the left, right, left that left the rhythmic reptantia reeling, then made a dash for the opening in the center. 3 down, 1 right to go. But that final ghost crab flock was bigger and more aggressive than the rest. The kind of decapods that weren't afraid to play dirty. One of them jabbed its short claws toward Omar like a boxer, then brought its big claw up for a booming bolo punch. Omar jumped backwards, not quite ready to clinch with a crustacean. Then he noticed something. When that crab swung its mighty claw, the water didn't move. A hard shell of that size should have made some sort of splash, but the waves were calm, which meant, what if the ghost crabs were actually ghosts? They were living in a sunken shipwreck after all. If the creepy shoe fits, am I right? So Omar decided to test his theory. Instead of playing tag, he tried for Red Rover and ran straight into the last line of crabs. And sure enough, he went right through them. He felt a slight chill in his bones as he moved, but otherwise it was like they were never there at all. And now the conch was right within his reach. It sang another song as he grabbed it from the pedestal, and the ghost crab ghosts all disappeared as soon as he picked it up. Omar assumed this was a good sign. And why wouldn't he? He'd gotten what he wanted. He swam back out from the bilge with the conch shell tucked beneath his arm and rejoined the rest of the group outside the ship. He was eager to share the story of his fantastical adventure. But we were all ready to head back to the ship. He was a bit disappointed, but figured he could tell us all about it when we were back on board. What could go wrong? The answer, as it turned out, was a ghost of another kind. Omar was the last one to reach the ship, but this time he wasn't straggling behind. It's just hard to swim while you're carrying a huge shell. By the time he reached the airlock and squeezed out of his scuba suit, the rest of us had all dried off and gone upstairs. So Omar went back to his room alone to try out his new sea horn. He took a deep breath and blew through the bore. But no sound came out. Something else came out instead. A swirling sonic blast of spirit, erupting in an ectoplasmic pandemonium. There had been a gaggle of ghosts inhabiting the shell, and Omar had just let them out. Maybe that's what the ghost crab ghosts were guarding. The same strange chill moved through Omar's body as the revenants roamed around him and all across the room. "Stop, please, who are you?" he shouted, but the ghosts were all too busy bouncing off the walls, which was understandable. They had been cooped up in a conch shell for who knows how long. Then he heard another song wafting on the breeze, and this time, it was coming from the conch itself. Omar lifted the conch up to his ear, and that's when he finally listened. Some seashells can capture the sound of the sea itself. I'm serious. Next time you're at the beach, pick up a seashell and hold it to your ear. But this shell was different. It carried the songs of the souls who'd gone down with the ship. Omar heard the dusty memories of sunken folk songs and Tin Pan Alley tunes, of strangers forced into close quarters as they crossed the great ocean in search of something better. A vortex swirled through the air, and soon that gaggle of ghostly ship guests solidified before him. The air in Omar's room coalesced around their spectral skins, until their faded faces found their shape once again, strengthened by the shadow of a song in a shell. There were 5 of them there, 5 separate souls, with the same lonely eyes, who had all been lost at sea so long ago. Omar looked each one in those lonely eyes, and then asked, "Can you tell me a story? Or sing me a song? It's basically the same thing." The ghosts all glanced at one another, then turned their attention back towards Omar. Then all at once, each of them smiled. Like Omar, they had big emotions too, and not a lot of ways to share them. You can shout all you want into the spiralized void of a seashell, but that won't do you any good if no one's there to listen. And the best way to find someone to listen with you is to try and hear them first. That's precisely what Omar did. Within the walls of his small quarters, he was hearing first-hand history crested on spectral sound waves. And he was learning to play along. When the other crew members passed by in the hallway, all they heard were the eerie blasts of a strange-sounding trumpet coming from Omar's room. Yet somehow, the songs still wormed their way into each of the kids' heads. But that's a story for another time. For now, this is your captain. Out. Musicland Stories is a collaboration between Starglow Media and Double Elvis. Executive producers from Double Elvis are Jake Brennan and Brady Sattler. Executive producers from Starglow Media are Jed Baker and Agarenish A. Palmer. This episode of Musicland Stories was written by Tom Dunn. Alessandro Santoro is our showrunner. Narration by me, Nikki Lynette. Original score by Scott Janovitz. Story editing by Zeph Lundy. An episode mixed by Matt Tahaney. Grown-ups, you can find more ad-free audio fun for the whole family by subscribing to Starglow Plus on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts.